Hey folks, Reloading Bench back with you once again. Tonight I wanted to touch on primers and loading or getting primers ready for reloading. And one of the reasons I wanted to touch on this video was one from a low-end point of view in terms of making it as easy as possible to load for a press, and then stepping into some of the higher end media along the lines of the progressive presses and some of the differences and what I found that I actually like and then what I don't like. And I think what generated my desire to do this video was watching another video, and it's interesting to see some of the folks on YouTube over time and watch their channels progress to the point of becoming just completely bought out and doing nothing but advertising and endorsing, as opposed to personal perspectives and what's worked for them, as opposed to just blatant, really blatant advertising to the point of promoting product that is prohibitively more difficult to use, and obviously more difficult to use, and hiding some of those aspects in the video or glossing over them in their videos. So I just thought it was funny, and I thought I'd stir the pot up a little bit. I'm not going to mention any names or posters, but you'll see what areas I cover. So I'm going to start with what I would call the easiest, and then work my way up the channel. So what I'll probably do is split this, or at least pause it, and then break out each component that I'm going to talk about. So when I first started out and I was getting into my first press, at the same time I bought my first Lee turret, I also picked up the Lee hand press. And from a simplicity point of view, doing one primer at a time, I think I'll throw 10 of them out here. Doing a primer at a time by hand with the Lee Prime, Lee Ram Prime. Lighting's a little different. As opposed to being behind me, it's in front of me now. And essentially, where your shell holder locks into your press, that Ram Prime would lock in, and you would have a shell holder where a die is, and every time you raise your ram or lower your ram, depending on what you consider raising and lowering, you would then seat a primer, and one at a time. And naturally I have a small primer there, so these large primers in my hand are not going to fit, but I think you get the idea. One at a time, very manual. Not the best, not the worst. I happen to be a fan of priming on the press. I do not like priming by hand. Having a bunch of primers in a tray, even with primer isolation to reduce any detonation and cascading effect of primers going off, would bother me. So I'm just not a fan of hand priming. So I do everything on the press. So I would say this is the most basic. In fact, with my 416 Barrett series, this is exactly how I will prime that 50 BMG case, 50 BMG primer and case, at least from a priming perspective, although it's a 416 Barrett cartridge. So it has a lot of 50 BMG to it, but in essence, something very simple and basic that you could move around to any press. So I'd say that's at the lowest end. Back again with the next route. Again, me being a Lee fan and Lee user, the Lee Safety Prime. A lot of people bash this, and I think the biggest reason they bash it is because they don't know how to set it up on their press. But once it's set on the press, swinging and releasing a primer in the primer arm is ridiculously easy. But in terms of, and I've not found another tray, even the manual trays, that flip like a Lee tray. And you'll see what I mean here in a second. Something I discovered in my trials and tribulations is when you try to load this and you're trying to put it on a flat surface and open it up and have it stay even, you notice it's not cooperating. So what I found is use a reloading tray. Fits nicely, locks in, it's flat. I can then dump all my primers in, nice and easy. I've got this leftover batch from previously. And what I mean by Lee's primer tray, the safety primer, being the most, I don't know what to say, it just works. No other tray, and I'm talking about this from all of my Lee stuff, Lee's large and small primer for safety prime. Just a couple of jiggles and all of the primers are set to go. I'll do the exact same, or at least I'll try to, with this tray, and you'll see the difference. So feeding them, it just doesn't get any easier. There's 100 primers ready to go. Not that much time to get them in, orientate them correctly, and get them ready to load. So I'm going to take these, and I'm probably not going to pause the video. I'm going to shake them up a little bit and throw them into this priming tray, and that can feed into another segment that I'd like to talk about. So I'm going to put them in my hand because I don't want to cheat and have them all, and you knew that was going to happen. Dun, dun, dun. That's Primer Murphy Law, which is actually a good thing because it keeps me sharp and on my toes and trying to find that last escaped primer. But so you'll notice that these are all in a kind of similar state as this was. And again, seems like there's always a few, regardless of how much I jiggle, shake. I've got about 1, 2, 3, 4 primers that refuse to want to play nice. And I'm going to try and do this without touching the primer. Normally what I would have done is given up by now and grab those last 2 primers. And that was it. So that was a lot of effort on this particular type of primer tray. So I'm going to throw them all in my hand again and see how many I lose. A little better that time. And again, I'm going to throw them in the Lee. And I only lost 1 that time. So again, I would say those are in about the same state of disarray as in this particular tray. And here we go with the Lee. And we're done. So for the Lee bashers, hey, in fact, I'll even take these and flip them and then flip them again. And now I've got them all up. So I'm going to leave these like this because I need them in this state. And this is going to play into our next priming method. But I will pause. Hey folks, I'm back. So this, as you can tell, is a primer pickup tube. This just happens to be Hornady's. There's others out there from everyone who makes a progressive press, or at least a primer fed tube. And this picks up my primers. And in order to get the primers into my primer tube on my press, I have to pick each one of these up individually. So there's 100 different taps. And then I have to flip this upside down and have them all orient the correct way, and then take this cotter pin out as I'm holding this over my primer tube on the press, pull it out, fill the primer tube. So what I'm going to do, just to give you an idea, is I'm going to pick all of these primers up, these 100 primers, and it'll also let me figure out how to speed video up when I'm editing. So I'm going to hit start, and I'm going to see how long it takes me to pick up 100 primers. So when I was getting into progressive reloading, I thought I was going to be a speed demon, because we all know everything's much faster on a progressive press. And I've heard people say, well, you just buy more pickup tubes so that you can load a whole bunch of primers to have them ready for your reloading session. So every tube holding about 100, depending on how many bullets you want to reload during a session. You get the idea. So I'm about halfway done. Is this going to take years off my life? No. Is it a pain in the butt? Yes. Is it something I would want to do? No. So this was my biggest turnoff moving into the progressive space. Again, not a big deal. I mean, the tools are meant to do what they're meant to do. And we're probably down to about our last 10 or so. And that was 1 minute and 26 seconds to reload all of these. And you can hear them moving around in there. Now what was interesting, and again, what started me on this particular little video segment, was somebody promoting how great a product was from a vendor on these pickup tubes. And in doing the release, they had to take time to mention that this one always gets stuck. Well, if this is such a great product, why is one always getting stuck? Well, it's always getting stuck because of the nature of what this is. So when I dump these out, you won't be able to see through that tube. You won't be able to see light through that tube because there's still a primer stuck there. And I don't know about you, but I don't like messing with live primers. So regardless of what tool you have, in fact, I'll put the cotter pin back in because we all know that that one primer is going to launch and will never be found again on the garage floor. So I'm now going to give a little tap, and there we go. So that's all 100 primers, minute, and let's call it 1:30 to round up. So 90 seconds to reload 100. So almost a second per primer. I don't think that's cool, but you know, until the press vendors come up with something different, it is what it is. So on to the next method. Back again. Okay, so for loading a primer tube on a progressive press, this is my absolute favorite device. And I've heard these bashed as well. And it's called the Vibra Prime, and it's by Frankfurt Arsenal. In fact, when I was first getting into progressive reloading, this wasn't made, or let me restate that. The original version of this was discontinued, and this particular item had not been made. This is a second generation of the original Vibra Prime. And there are versions of this out there, not necessarily from Frankfurt Arsenal, but other vendors, anywhere from, these were becoming hundreds of dollars because of their rarity. And the other manufacturers were making pretty heavy duty ones, which were also hundreds of dollars. And I think some of the press manufacturers sell individual, meaning large or small primer, reloading, vibratory reloading devices for multiple hundreds of dollars. So when this came back out on the market, I jumped at it. And if you watch them, they're about $50, $50 to $60, but you watch them every once in a while, they go on sale for about $25. Even at $50, best money spent, in my opinion, for reloading and the time savings. So essentially what you do is you load in a unit. This is a universal tray. One side has an L for the large primer, The other side has an S for the small primer, and there is a gate on one side of this plastic top that can block whatever side you're not loading. So for tonight, I'm going to be reloading these large primers. So when I put the primers in here, I would essentially block the S and then have all the primers come down here as I get ready to load them into the large chute. So once again, there's the challenge of getting them all in here. I think I'll stand up for this. Getting them all in here and oriented the right way. And normally I don't use, I hate these round things, these primer flip trays. I don't normally use them. So I would normally reload, or excuse me, unload all the primers directly onto this like that. And since I'm not going to be able to do that, I'm just going to dump them there. So I think we're done with that. And I'm going to carefully try and flip them. And again, this isn't as nice as the Lee. And when I say as nice as the Lee, I mean in terms of how quickly it is to flip. And since I'm trying not to touch any of the primers, which is not going as planned. So I've got one primer in here, and it's probably going to be easier to isolate that primer, flip it over manually. All right, so now I have all my primers oriented the correct way. Here's my large, here's my small. I'm going to gate or shut off, partition off the small. And naturally there's a primer sticking up. Okay, so now I've got all my primers on the small side ready to go into the large size. You're going to take your pistol, slide that in, kind of hold it with a little pressure, and then you're going to essentially stick this up and twist. So now you have a sealed device. And the way you do this, since I don't normally do this in front of a camera, is you tilt at like a 40, maybe 30 to 40 degree angle. You tilt and shake. So I'm going to try and do this live, and let's bust out the timer. Now obviously I know this isn't a true test because we had all this prep work, and this prep work probably took more than a few seconds. So, but for the sake of getting the primers in this tube, I just wanted to show you how fast it actually goes. So. And that was 20 seconds, 22 seconds, because I was a little slow to actually stop it. So about 20 seconds to fill this tube. And again, same thing. I would walk this over to my press tube and open that up. And I have, you can see, no blockages. So, completely different methods. I think this is a lifesaver, the Vibra Prime, for anybody who owns a progressive tube-fed priming system instead of using pickup tubes. The only complaint I've heard is certain primers don't want to feed so well. And I don't know if that's later models or earlier models, but I've never had issues. I did take some very high grit and polish the holes so that there was no leftover plastic from the manufacturing process. But that was it. I've not had problems with this Vibra Prime, and I swear by it. So to me, it's a lifesaver. So those are the priming methods that I've used throughout my reloading trials and errors, and I've found that certain things work, certain things don't. Some things give you a little more trouble than others, but from a progressive tube-fed priming system, I absolutely love the Vibra Prime. So I think it's worth every penny, especially when you get it on sale. Other manufacturers have them. I know Hornady's got a pistol-looking one, but they're out there. Give them a try. Make your life easier. Take care for now.